Tom had lived in his little suburban home for nearly 7 years without any problems. The neighborhood was mostly peaceful, filled with normal folks who waved hello while getting their mail or walking their dogs. Tom wasn't really the social, butterfly type. He preferred spending weekends fixing things around his house or watching football games with a cold beer in hand. His backyard was his pride and joy, surrounded by a 6-foot wooden fence that gave him privacy from the outside world. That fence had been there since the day he bought the place installed by the old owner, based on property lines drawn up years ago. Life was simple and good. Tom went to work at the local hardware store 5 days a week, came home to his golden retriever Max, and enjoyed the quiet life he had built for himself. His neighbors seemed to appreciate that he kept his lawn mowed and his holiday decorations tasteful. Nothing fancy, just enough to show he cared about his little corner of the world. That peaceful existence came crashing down on a sunny Saturday morning in April. Tom was in his kitchen making scrambled eggs when he heard a knock on his front door. Not the casual kind of knock a friend might use, but the aggressive pounding of someone who meant business. "Coming, coming," Tom called, out, wiping his hands on a dish towel and turning off the stove. Max followed at his heels, tail wagging despite the unfriendly sound of the knocking. When Tom pulled open the door, he found himself face to face with a woman he barely recognized. She lived 3 houses down, the new neighbor who had moved in maybe 6 months ago. They had crossed paths exactly once when Tom was dragging his trash cans back from the curb. He had smiled and said hello, and she had given him a tight-lipped nod before hurrying inside her house. The woman stood on his porch with her arms crossed tightly across her chest. Her hair was pulled back in a severe ponytail, and she wore the kind of expression that said she wasn't here for friendly small talk. "Your fence is on my property," she said bluntly, not bothering with a greeting. "I had a surveyor come out yesterday, and he confirmed it. You need to move it immediately. I'm planning to expand my garden next week, and that fence is in my way." Tom felt his stomach drop. The fence? The one that had been there for who knows how many years before he even bought the place? Good morning to you too," he said, trying to keep things civil. Max pushed his nose against Tom's leg, sensing the tension. "I'm sorry, but that fence has been there for years, long before I bought this house. I have the original property survey that shows it's in the right spot." The woman's eyes narrowed. She reached into her purse and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "Well, my survey says otherwise," she snapped, thrusting the paper at him like she was serving legal documents. "You have 3 days to move it, or I'll be calling my lawyer. I'm not playing around." Tom took the paper, feeling like he'd somehow stepped into someone else's argument. "Look, miss, I'm sorry, I don't think we've properly met. I'm Tom." "It doesn't matter who I am," she said sharply. "What matters is that your fence is taking up 2 feet of my property, and I want it moved by Tuesday. End of discussion." Before Tom could say another word, the woman turned on her heel and marched back down his driveway, her ponytail swinging with each determined step. Tom stood in the doorway, the paper clutched in his hand, with Max whining softly beside him. "Well, buddy," Tom said to his dog, "looks like our peaceful Saturday just got a whole lot more complicated." Inside, Tom unfolded the paper she had left him. It wasn't an official survey at all, just a hand-drawn map with messy measurements scribbled in the margins. Some lines were crossed out and redrawn, and there were coffee stains on one corner. Tom frowned, studying the amateur sketch. According to this, his fence was supposedly 2 feet over the property line along the entire back edge of his yard. The smell of burning eggs brought him back to reality. "Ah, shoot!" Tom hurried back to the kitchen, where his breakfast was now a blackened mess in the pan. As he scraped the ruined eggs into the trash, he couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right about that woman's claim. Tom had never been one for confrontation. He'd always tried to get along with everyone, to be the reasonable guy who could work things out with a handshake and a smile. But there was something about the way that woman had spoken to him, like he was deliberately trying to steal her land, that didn't sit well. After cleaning up the kitchen, Tom went to his office and pulled out the folder where he kept important house documents. His property survey was there, done by a professional when he bought the place. He spread it out on the desk and studied it carefully. According to this official document, his fence was actually 6 inches inside his property line. He wasn't encroaching on anyone's land. If anything, he was giving up a small strip of his own yard. Tom sat back in his chair, scratching Max behind the ears as the dog rested his head on Tom's knee. "Something's not adding up here, boy," he said. "And I don't think this is going to be as simple as that lady wants it to be." Little did Tom know, this was just the beginning of what would turn into the neighborhood's biggest property dispute in years, one that would reveal surprising truths about boundaries, both physical and personal. Sunday morning came with blue skies and a knot in Tom's stomach. He hadn't slept well, tossing and turning as his mind replayed yesterday's confrontation over and over. Max had sensed his unease and had stayed closer than usual, those worried, brown eyes following Tom around the house. "We're gonna figure this out, buddy," Tom said, pouring kibble into Max's bowl. The dog wagged his tail but didn't immediately dive into his breakfast like he usually did. Even Max seemed to understand that something wasn't right in their normally peaceful world. After breakfast, Tom spread all his property documents across the kitchen table. He had the deed to the house, the original property survey from when he bought the place 7 years ago, and various home inspection reports. According to everything he had, the fence was definitely on his property. Not just on his property, but about 6 inches inside his property line. He wasn't taking anyone else's land. If anything, he was giving up a small strip of his own. Tom stood by his kitchen window, coffee mug in hand, and gazed out at the fence in question. It was nothing special, just a standard wooden privacy fence that had been there since before he moved in. It was starting to show its age, with a few boards that needed replacing and some weathered spots that could use a fresh coat of stain, but it served its purpose, giving Max a safe place to run around and giving Tom the privacy he valued on summer evenings when he grilled burgers or sat reading in his lawn chair. "This doesn't make any sense," he muttered to himself. How could that woman, he still didn't even know her name, claim the fence was on her property when his documents clearly showed otherwise? Tom wasn't the type to let things fester. He'd always believed in dealing with problems head-on, even if confrontation made his palms sweat. Decision made, he picked up his phone and started making calls to local surveyors. Most were closed on Sunday, but he left messages explaining his situation. By mid-afternoon, he had a callback from a company called Precision Property Lines. "We've got an opening Tuesday morning," said the friendly voice on the other end. "It'll cost $575 for a complete property survey with official documentation." Tom winced at the price. That was a big chunk of his monthly budget, but what choice did he have? The neighbor had given him until Tuesday to move the fence. At least this way he'd have solid proof one way or the other. "I'll take it," Tom said, scheduling the appointment for 8 a.m. Tuesday. Monday dragged by at work. Tom struggled to focus on helping customers find the right kind of screws or explaining the difference between various grades of sandpaper. His mind kept wandering back to the fence situation. What if, by some weird mistake, the fence really was on her property? Moving. It would cost thousands, money he didn't have. When Tuesday morning finally arrived, Tom called in late to work, explaining he had an emergency property issue to deal with. His boss wasn't thrilled, but agreed to let him come in at noon. The surveyor showed up right on time, a middle-aged man named Bill with weathered hands and equipment that looked well used but professional. Max immediately approved of Bill, wagging his tail as the surveyor patted his head. "So you've got a property line dispute with a neighbor?" Bill asked, checking something on his electronic tablet. "Sort of," Tom explained. "New neighbor says my fence is on her property. My paperwork says it isn't. I just need to know what's what." Bill nodded. "Let's get to work then. This'll take a few hours to do properly." Tom hadn't expected it to be such an involved process. Bill pulled out all sorts of equipment, a transit level on a tripod, measuring wheels, stakes, bright pink ribbon, and various other tools Tom couldn't name. He worked methodically, consulting official county records on his tablet, taking measurements from known reference points and marking various spots around the property. Tom tried to stay out of the way, but curiosity kept drawing him back outside to watch. After the third time Tom wandered out to check on progress, Bill just smiled. "Most people are the same way," he said. "It's your land, of course you want to know exactly where the lines are." Around 11:30, Bill finally packed up his equipment and called Tom over to show him the results on his tablet. What he said made Tom's jaw drop. "Your fence is actually 8 inches inside your property line," Bill explained, pointing to various markers he'd placed. "Not only is it not encroaching on your neighbor's land, but you've actually been giving up about 8 inches of your own property along the entire 120-foot fence line." Tom let out a long breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. "So my fence is fine where it is?" "More than fine," Bill confirmed. "It's actually costing you some square footage. But there's something else you should know." Bill led Tom around to the other side of his property, where a tall hedge separated his yard from the same neighbor's property. "See these markers?" Bill pointed to small orange flags he'd placed along the ground. "This is your actual property line. And that hedge? It's nearly 2 feet over onto your land." Tom stared in disbelief. "Are you serious? Her hedge is on my property, but she's complaining about my fence that isn't even on her land?" Bill shrugged. "Happens more often than you'd think. People get ideas in their heads about where property lines should be, especially if they didn't get a proper survey done when they bought their place." He tapped something on his tablet. "I'll email you the official documentation this afternoon. It'll have all the measurements, GPS coordinates, and my professional certification. It's legally binding and would stand up in court if things ever went that far." Tom thanked Bill and wrote him a check for $575. It was a lot of money, but as he watched Bill drive away, he felt it was worth every penny. Knowledge was power, and now he had the facts. Max bounded around the yard, oblivious to property disputes and surveys, just happy to be outside on a beautiful day. Tom scratched behind the dog's ears, feeling a strange mix of relief and apprehension. He had the truth on his side now, but somehow he doubted his neighbor would accept it gracefully. "What do you think, Max?" he asked. "Should we go talk to her now, or wait for the official paperwork?" Max barked once and wagged his tail. "You're right," Tom nodded. "Better to have everything in hand before the next round. This isn't over yet, not by a long shot." Thursday afternoon, Tom's phone pinged with an email notification. The official survey report had arrived, complete with detailed maps, measurements, and a signed certification from Bill. Tom printed everything out at work, earning curious glances from his coworkers as page after page rolled out of the office printer. "Property dispute," he explained with a shrug when his boss raised an eyebrow. "Neighbor thinks my fence is on her land." "And is it?" his boss asked. Tom shook his head. "Nope. Actually, her hedge is on my land." His boss chuckled. "Good luck with that conversation." All the way home, Tom rehearsed what he would say. He wasn't good at confrontation, never had been. Even as a kid, he'd been the peacemaker, the one who tried to find middle ground when his friends argued about which game to play or who got to bat first in backyard baseball. But this was different. This was his home, his property, his right. Max greeted him at the door with his usual enthusiasm, tail wagging so hard his whole back end swayed. Tom bent down to ruffle the golden fur. "Ready for some excitement, buddy? We're going to have a chat with our neighbor." He changed out of his work clothes, tucked the survey documents into a folder, and took a deep breath. "No time like the present," he muttered, giving himself a quick pep talk in the hallway mirror. The walk to his neighbor's house felt longer than it should have. It was only 3 doors down, but with each step, Tom felt his heart beating a little faster. He didn't even know her name, he realized. How weird was that? About to have a serious property dispute with someone whose name he didn't know. He rang the doorbell and waited, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. The door swung open to reveal the woman from Saturday, looking just as unfriendly as before. She wore gardening gloves and had a smudge of dirt on her cheek. "Yes?" she said, her tone making it clear she wasn't happy to see him. "Hi there," Tom began, aiming for friendly but firm. "I'm Tom from 3 houses down. I don't think we've properly introduced ourselves yet." She looked at him impatiently. I'm Linda. If you're here about the fence, I told you that you have until today to move it. Actually, that's exactly why I'm here, Tom said, holding up the folder. I had a professional survey done on Tuesday. I've got the results right here, and I thought we should talk about them. Linda's eyes narrowed, but she stepped back and gestured for him to come inside. Her living room was neat and sparsely decorated, with a few moving boxes still stacked in one corner. She pointed to a chair, and Tom sat down, placing the folder on the coffee table between them. I had this survey done by Precision Property Lines, Tom explained, opening the folder and spreading out the main property map. They're certified by the state and their findings are legally binding. Linda crossed her arms but leaned forward to look at the documents. According to this survey, Tom continued, pointing to the relevant markings, my fence is actually 8 inches inside my property line along our shared boundary. Not only is it not on your property, but I've actually been giving up part of my own yard all these years. That can't be right, Linda said, grabbing the paper and studying it with a frown. My survey clearly showed. The hand-drawn map you showed me isn't an official survey, Tom interrupted, trying to keep his voice steady. This one is certified and legally binding, but there's something else we need to discuss. He pulled out another page from the folder, this one showing the other side of his property. The surveyor also found that your hedge is approximately 2 feet onto my property along this entire section. Tom tapped the clearly marked line. That's actually a significant amount of my land that you're using. Linda's face flushed red. She stood up abruptly, the papers clutched in her hand. This is ridiculous. That hedge has been there for years. How many years? Tom asked, staying calm. I don't know. It was there when I bought the place 6 months ago, Linda snapped. Well, that's important, because in our state, adverse possession requires 10 continuous years of use, Tom said. He'd done his homework, spending hours researching property laws online after getting the preliminary results from Bill. I've only owned my house for 7 years and you've only owned yours for 6 months. So legally, that hedge is encroaching on my property. Linda's jaw clenched. She looked from the papers to Tom and back again. So what are you saying? You want me to tear out the entire hedge? Do you know how much that would cost? Tom hadn't expected this question. What did he want? He'd been so focused on proving he was right that he hadn't thought much about the next step. I'm saying we have 2 issues to resolve, he said finally. First, my fence is staying exactly where it is because it's on my property. Second, your hedge needs to be addressed because it's on my property. You have a few options. You can remove the hedge at your expense, you can trim it back to the property line, or I can have it removed and send you the bill. Linda's face grew darker with each word. For a moment, Tom thought she might throw something at him. Instead, she thrust the papers back at him and pointed to the door. Get out. I'll be talking to my lawyer about this. Tom gathered the documents and stood up. I've left you a copy of the survey in this folder. The property lines are clearly marked now with stakes and pink ribbon so you can see for yourself. I hope we can resolve this amicably, but I'm not going to let this drop. As he reached the door, he turned back. By the way, I'm having some fencing companies come out tomorrow to give me quotes. Just so you know, there might be people looking at our property line. What fencing companies? Linda demanded. You just said your fence is fine where it is. Tom shrugged. I'm considering my options. Have a good evening, Linda. He walked back to his house feeling a strange mix of emotions. Pride at standing up for himself, guilt for causing conflict, and a growing sense that this was far from over. Max greeted him at the door as if he'd been gone for days, not minutes. Well, that could have gone better, Tom told the dog, bending down to receive wet doggy kisses, but it also could have gone worse. At least now she knows I'm not backing down. He glanced out his front window and saw Linda standing in her yard, arms crossed, staring at the property markers the surveyor had left. She was on her phone, gesturing. Angrily as she talked, Tom sighed. Looks like round 2 is coming up fast, buddy. Hope you're ready for some excitement in the neighborhood. Friday and Saturday passed without a word from Linda. Tom kept expecting a lawyer's letter or another angry visit, but nothing happened. On Sunday afternoon, while he was washing his car in the driveway, he noticed Linda standing in her yard, staring at the property markers and talking on her phone. When she saw him looking, she quickly went back inside. "I think she's up to something, Max," Tom told his dog, who was happily lounging in a patch of sun next to the garden hose. Max thumped his tail in response, completely unconcerned about property disputes or angry neighbors. By Monday morning, Tom had made up his mind. If Linda wasn't going to address the hedge issue, he would move forward with his own plans. He'd spent the weekend getting quotes from 3 different fence companies, and now he was ready to put his plan into action. The first company had suggested simply repairing the old fence, but that would leave him still giving up those 8 inches of property. The second company's quote was way too high, nearly $4,000 for the project. But the third company, HOA Fencing, had offered a reasonable price and could start that very week. On his lunch break, Tom called HOA Fencing and accepted their quote. "I want the new fence built exactly on the property line," he emphasized. "Not 1 inch inside my property this time." "No problem," said the contractor. "We'll use the survey markers as our guide. We can start Wednesday morning if that works for you." Tom felt a mixture of nervousness and excitement as he hung up. This was a big step and a significant expense, but his gut told him it was the right move. Wednesday morning arrived bright and sunny. Tom had taken the day off work to oversee the fence project. The crew from HOA Fencing showed up at 7:30, their truck loaded with fresh cedar boards, posts, and equipment. "Morning," said the crew boss, a sturdy man named Pete. "Ready to get started?" Tom nodded, showing Pete the property survey and the markers. "Remember, I want it right on the line this time." "Got it," Pete said. "First thing is to take down the old fence. Should have the demolition done by lunch and start on the new posts this afternoon." The sound of the old fence coming down was louder than Tom expected. Boards creaked and cracked as they were pulled from the posts, and the dull thud of sledgehammers echoed through the yard as the concrete footings were broken up. Tom had taken Max to a friend's house for the day, knowing the noise would upset him. By noon, the entire old fence was gone, creating a clear view between Tom's yard and Linda's. The property line, now marked clearly with stakes and pink ribbon, showed just how far inside his own land the old fence had been. And on the other side of the property, the surveyor's markers made it painfully obvious how far Linda's hedge encroached onto his land. Around 1:30, as the crew was setting the first new posts, Tom heard a car door slam. He looked up to see Linda marching across her yard, face tight with anger. "What do you think you're doing?" she demanded, stopping at the property line. "Good afternoon, Linda," Tom said calmly. "I'm having my fence replaced. The old one was getting pretty weathered. And you just happened to decide to move it right after our conversation?" Her voice rose with each word. "I'm not moving it," Tom corrected her. "I'm placing it exactly on the property line, where it legally should be. The old fence was actually 8 inches inside my property, as the survey showed you." Linda's eyes narrowed as she watched the workers setting a post precisely on the survey marker. "So you're taking that extra 8 inches now?" "It's my property," Tom said simply. "Always has been. I'm just finally using all of it." Pete, the crew boss, looked uncomfortable with the tension. He busied himself checking measurements, clearly trying not to get involved in the neighbor dispute. "And what about my hedge?" Linda demanded. "Are you planning to rip that out too?" Tom had been thinking about this all weekend. He could force the issue, make her remove the hedge, and legally he'd be completely within his rights. But what would that accomplish besides creating a permanent enemy living 3 doors down? "About the hedge," Tom said, choosing his words carefully. "I'm willing to discuss options. The survey is clear that it's on my property, but I don't necessarily need that strip of land if what?" Linda cut in. "If we can come to an agreement about respecting property boundaries going forward," Tom finished. "I don't want to be fighting with my neighbors. Life's too short for that." Linda looked taken aback, as if she'd been expecting more aggression. For a moment, her stern expression faltered. "I need to think about it," she said finally. "But this fence better not cross onto my property by even an inch." "It won't," Tom assured her. "That's why I had the professional survey done. These guys are using those markers exactly." Linda gave a curt nod and headed back to her house. Tom let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Neighbor disputes are the worst, Pete commented, returning to Tom's side. Been doing this job 15 years, and property line issues never get easier. Tell me about it, Tom agreed. I just want my fence up and this whole thing behind me. The rest of the day passed without incident. By evening, all the posts were set in concrete, ready to cure overnight. The crew cleaned up, promising to return in the morning to start attaching the fence boards. As Tom stood in his backyard that night, looking at the row of fresh cedar posts standing exactly on his property line, he felt strangely satisfied. It wasn't just about reclaiming those 8 inches of yard. It was about standing up for himself, about not letting someone bully him out of what was rightfully his. The next morning, he was awakened by the sound of a hedge trimmer. Curious, he peeked out his bedroom window. There was Linda, aggressively, cutting back her hedge exactly to the property line marked by the surveyor's stakes. Tom smiled to himself. She hadn't apologized, he doubted she ever would. But her actions spoke volumes. Actions, after all, were what mattered. By Friday afternoon, the new fence was completed. It stood tall and straight, exactly on the property line, the fresh cedar glowing warm in the afternoon sun. Tom had splurged a little, adding decorative post caps and a matching gate that made the whole thing look much nicer than the old fence had ever been. And the hedge? It now stopped precisely at the property markers, leaving an awkward gap where it had once encroached onto Tom's land. It looked a bit strange, but to Tom, it was a reminder that sometimes you had to stand your ground, even when it was uncomfortable. "What do you think, Max?" Tom asked as they surveyed the completed fence together. "Worth all the drama?" Max barked once and wagged his tail. In dog language, Tom decided to take that as a definite yes. 2 weeks after the new fence went up, Tom was in his backyard grilling burgers when he heard someone call his name. He looked up to see his next-door neighbor, Bob, leaning over their shared fence with a curious expression. "Hey, Tom. New fence. Looks great," Bob said, nodding toward the cedar structure. "But I gotta ask, what happened with you and Linda? The whole street's been talking." Tom flipped a burger before answering. "Property line dispute. She claimed my old fence was on her land, but a survey showed it was actually well inside, my property line, and her hedge was 2 feet onto my land on the other side." Bob whistled. "No kidding? I always thought that hedge looked like it was cutting into your yard. So what happened? I saw some guys working on your fence for days. I decided to put up a new fence right on the property line this time." Tom shrugged like it wasn't a big deal, though secretly he still felt proud of standing his ground. Gained about 8 inches of yard all along the back. And she just accepted that? Bob looked skeptical. Tom smiled. "Well, not at first. But once she realized I had a legal survey backing me up, she didn't have much choice. She ended up trimming back her hedge to the property line too." "Good for you," Bob said, raising his soda can in a mock toast. "That woman's been a pain since she moved in. Complained about my wind chimes being too noisy last month." As if on cue. Bob's wind chimes tinkled softly in the spring breeze. They were hardly what anyone would call noisy. "Some people just want to control everything around them," Tom said, placing the burgers on a plate. "Want one? I made extra." Over the next few weeks, Tom noticed a strange thing happening. Neighbors he barely knew started stopping by to chat when he was out working in the yard. Mrs. Wilson from across the street brought him a plate of chocolate chip cookies, just because. The retired couple on the corner invited him over for coffee. At first, Tom was confused by the sudden attention. He'd lived on this street for 7 years and had never been what you'd call the neighborhood social butterfly. But gradually, he pieced together what was happening. "You're the hero of Maple Street," explained Joe, the retired mailman from 2 doors down, one evening when Tom was walking Max. "Nobody's had the guts to stand up to Linda before." "I'm not a hero," Tom protested, embarrassed. "I just didn't want to move my fence when it wasn't doing anything wrong." "Maybe," Joe said with a knowing smile. "But you're the first one who didn't back down when she started making demands. Did you know she tried to make the Thompsons take down their kid's basketball hoop? Said it was an eyesore and lowered." Property values. Tom hadn't known that. Nor had he known about Linda's complaints to the city about the Chen family's vegetable garden in their front yard, or her attempts to get the neighborhood association to ban certain paint colors she found distasteful. She's been on a mission to remake this neighborhood in her image since she moved in, Joe explained. You're the first one who showed her there are limits to her power. That evening, as Tom sat on his back patio enjoying the extended space his new fence had created, he thought about how differently things might have gone. He could have given in to avoid conflict. He could have gotten nasty and aggressive when he discovered he was in the right. Instead, he'd simply stood firm, but reasonable, and it had paid off in ways he never expected. Max lay at his feet, content in the cooling evening air, occasionally lifting his head to track the squirrels that dared to run along the top of the new fence. A month later, Tom was pulling into his driveway after work when he noticed something unusual, a for sale sign in front of Linda's house. He blinked in surprise. She was moving. Already? The next day was Saturday, and Tom was outside washing his car when a real estate agent emerged from Linda's house with a couple following behind. The agent was gesturing enthusiastically about the quiet, family-friendly neighborhood and well-maintained property. Tom caught snippets of their conversation as they walked around the yard. "And what about the neighbors?" the woman asked. "Oh, lovely people on this street," the agent assured her. "Very friendly community." Tom had to suppress a smile as he rinsed soap off his car. He wondered if the agent knew about Linda's escapades in community improvement. That afternoon, he found an envelope in his mailbox. Inside was a printed real estate listing for Linda's house and a handwritten note. "Tom, I've accepted a job in another state and will be moving at the end of the month. My realtor advised me to resolve any property issues before listing the house, so I've included a copy of my new survey, confirming the property lines match yours. Linda." No apology, no admission of being wrong, but it was something. Tom pinned the note to his fridge with a magnet, a small trophy of sorts. 3 weeks later, a moving truck pulled up to Linda's house. Tom watched from his living room window as her furniture was loaded up. Eventually, Linda emerged from the house doing a final walkthrough with her realtor. She paused at the edge of her property, looking at the neatly trimmed hedge and Tom's new fence standing precisely on the property line. For a moment, Tom thought she might come over to say goodbye. Instead, she gave a small, tight nod in the direction of his house before getting into her car and driving away. "Well, Max," Tom said to his dog, who was watching the activity with mild interest, "looks like we'll be getting new neighbors soon." 2 days later, Tom was working in his garden when a pickup truck pulled into Linda's now-sold driveway. A couple about his age got out, followed by 2 young children and a spotted dog who immediately started exploring the yard with enthusiasm. The man waved when he spotted Tom. "Hi there, we're the Andersons. Just closed on the house yesterday. Thought we'd come measure for furniture before moving day." Tom waved back. "Welcome to the neighborhood. I'm Tom and this is Max," he added, as his golden retriever trotted up beside him, tail wagging. "That's a nice fence," the man commented, walking over to shake Tom's hand. "We were thinking of putting one up for our dog. Any recommendations on who to use?" Tom smiled. "As a matter of fact, I have a great company to suggest. But first, let me tell you a little story about this fence." As Tom recounted his fence saga to his new neighbor, leaving out some of the more unflattering details about Linda, he realized that sometimes standing your ground isn't just about winning an argument. Sometimes it's about creating space for something better to grow in its place, like 8 extra inches of yard, and maybe some new friendships too. The end.